Welcome, everyone. I'm gonna let the folks in, but we're gonna go on mute for a few minutes here while we're just getting things out. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for your patience on the Zoom. We're going to settle in the room here. Our panelists are kind of slowly getting to the front here, but we got a couple things to go ahead and get started. I'm Sean Hammond. I am the Associate Director of State Relations for the University of Michigan. And this is the Wolverine Caucus. Today we are have members of our Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention team, and we're talking 1 year later, where does Michigan stand on firearms laws in 2024? We had the same topic last March as a discussion point for the Wolverine Caucus, and now we're kind of regrouping a year later. But normally this is where I do a lot of introductions, but today I'm actually going to turn this over first off to Dr. Mark Zimmerman, who is the co-director for the U of M Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. Dr. Zimmerman's research focuses on the application and development of empowerment theory and the study of adolescent health and resilience. He has translated this research on individual and community risk and promotive factors to develop and evaluate community-based programs with an emphasis on prevention of community violence. He is also the co-director or the director of the CDC-funded Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center and Prevention Research Center, and co-director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance-funded National Center for School Safety.
Yeah. I didn't expect that. I will tell you, thanks for being here. I will tell you who I am, if you just did. Before we get started, and I introduce Buzz, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. That's what the handler is called. The guy. So basically, we're focused on firearm injury prevention specifically. That's our number one focus. We're focusing on injury and death involving firearms. We recognize that there's no one solution, no one law, no one policy will prevent all the injury and death. In 2017, you may all know that the number of people who died by firearms surpassed the number of people who died by cars, and it's been separated ever since. So clearly, this is an issue that we need to be paying attention to. Also, many people don't know that most firearm deaths are actually due to suicide. Suicides among mostly white middle-aged men in rural areas in the United States. The state of Michigan basically mirrors the national data. The second most is interpersonal violence, which is often our focus. When I'm in a room like this, I often ask people, what do you think about when you think about firearm violence? And they usually think about urban violence, again, which is about 40%, 38%. But they often also say mass shootings. Mass shootings, actually, while heinous, are really only account for 1 to 2% of all firearm deaths in the United States. Just to give you a sense of that. So we think of firearm injury prevention very broadly, everything from suicide and community violence. We think about mass shootings, because clearly there is an issue. One of the things that some of our folks are looking into is what happens afterwards from a mass shooting, especially. But we focus on the person who's hit by the bullet, either killed or injured, sometimes very severely. But also what happens to the family, what happens to the community that gets affected by that. There are many sequelae that we haven't really paid much attention to. We also focus on school safety. We think about this as school safety versus school shootings because it's a bigger issue. You'll hear more about that. Obviously, there's also the unintentional, what people call accidental injuries. There's also injuries around intimate partner violence. So there's a lot of different issues around firearms and how firearms end up hurting and injuring people. So we're trying to focus on all aspects of that. We also look at firearm injury across the lifespan. Most of the interpersonal violence is really occurs at younger ages, and most of the suicide at older ages. So again, not one single solution. We're also focused on taking information that we find that's an evidence-based program and trying to figure out ways to implement that in new settings and to translate research that we have done into programs to evaluate them. So we're really trying to do a wide range of activities. We have 6 different cores, one on implementation I just mentioned, one on training education. We have the first federal grant that's focused on training postdoctoral fellows on in firearm injury in particular. We have surgeons as some of our postdocs, all the way to sociologists. So a wide range of people were involved in training. And then there's other kinds of training for undergraduate programs. We have a massive course that's a pretty online course. We have research and scholarship where we're funding pilot studies. We have funded pilot studies that have turned into larger projects. So I'll mention that one is up in the UP, safe storage, working with rural communities, partnering with schools, hospitals, public health, firearm, and working with firearm-owning families. There are obviously many in our state. And so that pilot project has now turned into an R1 from the CDC. We also have a policy core. You're going to hear about policy and the evaluations that we do around policies and work that we're doing here today to help translate the work that we're finding to actions to see if we can take it to scale. I'm told I'm only supposed to talk for 5 minutes, so don't worry. I won't take it. We also have a data methods core. That's for data nerds like me really get wake up and get excited. So I won't go much into that. Suffice to say that it's methodological. It's helping people figure out data issues and also creating a data repository for data for people around the country to be able to tap into. And then a really important part of what we're doing is community engagement. So we have a whole community engagement core because we also believe we're going to do community interventions and we're going to translate engaged community, whether that's communities in urban settings where there might be more interpersonal violence or rural settings where we have to engage the local partners there. So I'll give you some positive examples. We have others working with, we funded Dr. Christy Gamrell on a project that's focused on LGBT health. There's lots of experience of violence that they, specifically firearm violence that they experience. Everything from shootings to threats with firearms. So she's looking into that. We also have a national a coordinating center for the National Institutes of Health, which is they have funded 6 programs, one in Michigan, but also Mississippi, Alabama, where else? Chicago, Illinois, Washington, D.C., to focus on community level interventions, community violence interventions, and we are providing technical assistance to helping develop that network across the country. So with that, I will end with some examples. I'll end with that and just say I'm going to introduce somebody I just met, who I met is a third. He's actually a third, and I asked Buzz what his given name was, and he was a third for his given name, but then often you get a second name, because to separate out who your senior is or your third is. But his Buzz, I've learned, was actually his name is his father's name, so he's actually Buzz the second, or Buzz Jr. So I don't know how that works and how you figured that out with your family, but he's a former senator. You probably know him better than I do, but I got about to share that with you. He's a former state senator, co-founder of Activate Detroit and a consultant with the Detroit Foundation. And he knows how to build winning relationships. And I'm looking forward to figuring out ways that we can collaborate going forward on the city of Detroit and in the state more broadly. So without any further ado, I'll step aside. Buzz Thomas is here to introduce our panel and to moderate our panel.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you. It's actually I am Sandover third and Buzzy Junior. I took the Y off in my 20s, dealing with that. To little too childlike. But I did keep buzz. So I'm going to be our moderator today. Hopefully, keep the conversation going amongst our three panelists as well as those of you here here in the audience. I don't know if we're doing questions over Zoom as well, but we want to make this as conversational as possible, recognizing there's a lot of information to share, and I also recognize that we probably some of us agree and some of us disagree on some of these issues. So hopefully the conversation will be productive in that regard. So I'm really delighted to be joined with our three panelists here, starting with Senator Stephanie Chang. Since most people work in government, I'm sure you all know Senator Chang. But Senator Chang is the first Asian American woman elected to the Michigan legislature. She worked as a community organizer in Detroit for nearly a decade before serving 2 terms in the State House of Representatives. She's now in her 2nd term in the Michigan Senate. Very proud to say that he's a part of the Alumni Association of Floor Leaders in the Senate. I had that office in the corner of the lower level of the Capitol for my last term in the Michigan Senate as well. And so really appreciate her work leading Senate Democrats. She has been just an amazing advocate for the citizens of Detroit, having negotiated a historic community benefits agreement with those seeking to build the Gordie Howe International Bridge crossing and Southwest Detroit. For those of you that don't know Detroit, it's a very challenged part. Well, the district where the bridge is going, a very challenged part of the Detroit community, and her giving voice to that community was nothing short of phenomenal. He served as state director for Next Gen Climate Michigan, alumni engagement and evaluation coordinator for the Center for Progressive Leadership in Michigan. And one of the things that I'm really excited about her background is that she also worked as the community engagement coordinator for the James and Grace Lee Boggs School, and assistant to Grace Lee Boggs, who was an activist, writer, and speaker in Michigan, and just does incredible work. And so thank you, Senator Chang, for joining us today. Dr. April Zioli is an associate professor in health management and policy in the School of Public Health and the director of the policy core in the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. She conducts interdisciplinary research with the goal of bringing together the fields of public health and criminology and criminal justice. Her main fields of investigation are the prevention of firearm violence, intimate partner violence, and homicide through the use of policy and law. She is one of the nation's leading experts on policy interventions for firearm use. And intimate partner interventions. Broadly, sorry, I was kind of commenting to Dr. Zioli that I've spent so much time on Zoom screens that I need to adjust my reading glasses. Broadly, Dr. Zioli studies the role of firearms in intimate partner violence and homicide, as well as the civil and criminal justice system's responses to intimate partner violence. Her research focuses on legal firearm restrictions for domestic violence users and their impact on intimate partner homicides and implementation of those firearm restrictions. We're going to get through this, I promise. Let me say that during the legislative debate last year, Dr. Zioli became an integral public health expert for policymakers, and I would hesitate to say that the legislation that passed is better for her for her introductions, and will continue to get better as she continues to work through them. Dr. Justin Heinze is currently an associate professor in the Department of Health, Behavior and Health Education in the School of Public Health. He also serves as the evaluation lead of the U of M Injury Prevention Center's Outreach and Translation Core. Dr. Heinze is an educational psychologist with a concentration in measurement, evaluation, and statistics. He has evaluated the effectiveness of many core projects including SAMHSA's Drug-Free Communities Program, Michigan's core state violence and injury prevention program, and has taught graduate level courses on health program evaluation. Dr. Heinze is currently the lead evaluator of the National Institutes of Justice funded interventions focused on school safety and violence prevention. The lead investigator of an NIJ funded study of an anonymous reporting system designed for the early identification of threats in the school community. And he leads the center in supporting program evaluation of this department. His research expertise is in the area of how youth exposure to violence and victimization delays successful adoption and persistence in adult role attainment, and whether positive interpersonal resources available to adolescents and young adults can mitigate the effect of violence exposure and in turn facilitate adjustment to adulthood. So we have a fantastic group of policymakers and academic professionals here. And so I'm going to start with Senator Chang to kind of set the table for us. We have 4 new firearms laws that went into effect in February. Senator Chang, could you start off by telling us what they are and what we know about the evidence base behind them and how effective they've been when you looked at them in other states?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Buzz. Really appreciate it, and thanks so much to you for putting this event together. So Stephanie Chang, State Senator, and also have the honor of being the chair of the Senate Committee on Civil Rights, Judiciary, and Public Safety, which is the committee that has taken up the firearm legislation over the past year. Also just want to give a quick shout out to, we actually do have a gun violence prevention caucus in the state legislature. And want to recognize, they're not here, they're at other things, but Senator Rosemary Bayer, the previous chair, actually been in leadership on these issues, and the current chair is Stephen Brayback, state representative, who I think may be stopping by at some point, but also been great work. So it's been a giant team effort between obviously the lawmakers and then a lot of the experts that have been working on these bills for a long time. Just sort of background prior to 2023 legislation around safe storage, around background checks, around domestic violence, and extremist protection orders had been introduced in the past, but it was not until last year that we were able to actually pass this legislation. And really, really grateful for the current makeup of this legislature lending itself to being able to accomplish these really important policy goals. So we'll talk a little bit about each of them, and then also talk about, exactly what Buzz said, just the evidence base behind the fact that these bills or these new laws will actually lead to dramatic increases in public safety. So the Extremist Protection Order bill, basically, if some of you may be familiar with these, but basically the idea is that if someone is posing a threat to themselves or others, creating a mechanism through which someone can actually petition for an extreme risk protection order to basically prohibit that person from having a gun or buying a gun, transporting guns, etc. That would be enforceable. It would go, it would go through a whole process with the judge, the court process. And so it could be a person actually filing a petition for themselves, or it could be a spouse or a family member, could be other members of the public who have interacted with this person and have a relationship and know that that person poses a threat, that can file a petition for this extremist protection order. So extremist protection orders have actually been implemented in 21 other states so far, and we have seen decreases in suicide as well as mass shootings. So Connecticut, for example, saw a reduction in the firearm suicide rate by 14%. And we also know that these laws have helped prevent mass shootings, given that in many cases, usually at least one person might know of that shooter's plan, in 77% of cases. So the hope is that we know that gun violence, we're not gonna be able to prevent all of it, but we can at least prevent some terrible tragedies from happening. And this extremist protection order law is going to be really critical in ensuring that we at least have this new tool that is really, really critical. So very excited about that. The next set of bills hopefully helps to lead around prohibiting those who have been convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence from having a firearm for a period of 8 years. This brings us in line with 31 and 31 other states of DC. And we know that unfortunately, women are 5 times more likely to be killed by their abuse partner when that abuser has access to a gun. Because of the dynamics around domestic violence, having this person actually in your home, living together, and knowing that domestic violence is something that can escalate. First time, something might be a little bit less severe, second or third or fourth time, it can get worse and worse. And if you have a firearm in the situation, definitely increases the lethality. Over the work that we've done on this issue for many years, actually referenced quite a bit of Dr. Zioli's research on this, and thank you for your leadership on this. And we believe that this common sense law, which passed with bipartisan support, can actually reduce the annual domestic violence deaths by 10% or more. And so we're eager to see this, it's now the law, hoping that it will have a big impact. The next is around background checks. So we have previously had background checks. We now make it very consistent across all types of firearms. And so we know that states who have implemented required background checks for unlicensed gun sales are actually associated with 10% fewer homicides. So eager again, now that this is the law, to see the impact of the universal background checks. And the last set of bills is around safe storage, which was mentioned earlier. As given the Institute's great work on this issue. So the safe storage law is basically ensuring that if an individual knew or reasonably should have known that a minor was present, they need to store their firearm properly, and will put in prescribed penalties if a minor did obtain a firearm that led to violence. So we actually know from studies that households that safely store firearms and ammunition are associated with 78% lower risk of self-inflicted injuries and an 85% lower risk of unintentional firearm injuries involving fire. We know that firearms are the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 17 within the United States. So this is huge. I remember talking with Prosecutor Kim Worthy about this, something that she has also led the way on, in addition to the domestic violence legislation. So we're very eager again to see how these laws are implemented. And one piece I should also mention on safe storage laws, because we also make it easier for folks by eliminating the sales and use tax on, the purchase of gun locks and gun safes, things like that. So the hope is that we will actually make it easier for folks to apply with the law by making it a little bit cheaper for people to buy these things. So and 26 states have implemented safe storage laws so far, and they have seen an 8% decrease in overall suicide rates and an 11% decrease in firearm suicide rates, specifically for adolescents. So definitely meaningful. I know a lot of this has been around numbers and statistics, but for every number of statistics, we're talking about someone's loved one whose life hopefully we can save. And so I'll just, say that I think for me, one of the most gratifying parts of this process of having hearings on this legislation and passing the legislation has actually just been hearing the stories from gun violence survivors who, just have experienced so much trauma and pain before have been willing to come to the state capitol and actually share their story of how they lost someone that was very close to them or a family member. And so just, grateful for all of the different organizations that have been involved in this effort and something for many years. And I think that we wouldn't be here today without them, and also without, all of the moms and the students and everyone that's organized, state leaders, etc., law enforcement, just, so many folks who came together to make it happen. So
It really can't be understated how important passing this legislation was, and it has been quite a long time in coming. Some of these issues were discussed when I was in the legislature in the first decade of the 2000s. So getting it across the finish line, congratulations. Dr. Cioli, as important as creation of these laws is implementation is going to be just as important. Can you talk a little bit about best practices in the implementation, particularly the ERBO law? Might have some of the greatest challenges or opportunities for us. Similarly, I know you've also done work, and it's been referenced a couple of times here, your work around PPO firearm relinquishment, best practices in that area. Could you take us a little bit to school?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realize I need to update my bio because I don't have in it that I studied extremist protection orders, but I've studied them, am studying them in 7 states: Oregon, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Maryland, and Washington. Adding more states now, Michigan will be one of those states. But what we've learned is that unless the state really focuses on implementation, how we get this done, extremist protection orders aren't. After every single step within that extremist protection order process, the steps being identify somebody who is at risk of harming themselves or others in the near future, petitioning for an extremist protection order, the judge looking at that petition, maybe there's a hearing that you have to attend, the order being granted or not, removing guns from the person who has them, and then eventually, when they're no longer under the extremist protection order, returning their child. Every part of that step needs direction, needs instructions, needs implementation. For example, you just take the assessing whether someone's at risk part. Most people are not at risk of harming themselves or others in the near future with a gun. But some people are, suicidal, and you need to be able to recognize when they are suicidal and might use a gun to harm themselves. You need to recognize when somebody really is homicidal. And those are the cases, those are the exceptions to safe, responsible gun ownership. That's when we need to intervene and temporarily remove their guns. So people need to be able to identify when an extremist protection order is appropriate. After that, there's the petitioning process. Law enforcement will know how to petition because they're used to filling out legal forms, they're used to going to court. Physicians will probably figure it out because they're used to filling out complicated forms as well. Civilians, those family members and intimate partners that are authorized to petition the state of Michigan need support. Everyday people don't know how to fill out court forms. We don't know what counts as evidence, what doesn't count as evidence. How to present the evidence because we have absolutely no training. One of the things that we found with implementation is that, and we take this from the domestic violence side of the literature, is that when there are advocates who can help with filling out the form, explaining the process to you, it will work better. We know that when people who are victims of domestic violence file for personal protection orders, if they have an advocate, they're more likely to present the evidence well and get that personal protection order. When you don't, they're less likely to get that personal protection order. Right now, in states that allow civilian petitioners, number one, civilians aren't petitioning all that much. It's mainly law enforcement in those states. But when they do petition, like we see in Oregon and Maryland, civilians are petitioning quite a bit. They're less likely to have the order granted. Now, we don't know why that is right now. We don't know if it's because they're not identifying cases that are really, really risky. And those cases just haven't been releasing that information, it's probably a combination of, you know, so they need assistance. We know that judges need assistance in figuring all of this out because the buck stops with them. And they don't want to be responsible for either removing someone's Second Amendment right temporarily or not removing firearms when the case could have used it or couldn't have used it. They don't want to be wrong, you know, on this. So they need support. And mostly, not mostly, but a huge part of this is that doorway encounter between law enforcement and the person who's under the extremist protection. When law enforcement go to, you know, either serve the order and get the guns, or, you know, just get the guns, you know, explain you're under this extremist protection order. By law, you have to relinquish your firearms to me. This is how it's gonna work, this is how you can get them back. People on both sides, law enforcement and the public, are worried about this process. You know, law enforcement is worried that they'll be shot, and the public's worried that they'll be shot. You know, so we need to make this encounter as safe and acceptable, you know, as possible. And I'm doing research right now in Florida and Maryland, looking at how different communities do this. And what we found, you know, getting into what's the best practice for implementation, is that there isn't a one size fits all. You know, this really needs to be tailored to the community, you know, that they're in. We know that some communities have dedicated extremist protection order officers, and this is what they do. They investigate the cases to decide, you know, does this warrant petitioning? And then if petition is granted, they're the ones that go and get the firearms. And one of the reasons I like that process is because they've already created a relationship with the respondent. You know, they've gone and talked to them about, you know, what their risk is, what's going on with them, and as they assess this risk and decide if the petition is appropriate. You know, so processes that show respect for the person who may at this time not be safe to have a gun. And, you know, that really try to make that relationship, you know, because extremist protections do not have to be a conflict. There's a better word, I just can't think of it right now. You know, they don't have to be something that is, you know, tense and fraught, because in the end, this is about saving lives. If this is about either saving the life of the person that is the respondent to the order, you know, or potentially saving, you know, somebody else's life if they are being violent towards somebody else. You know, so it's not, it doesn't have to be conditional.
You touched on it, and you anticipated a little bit of my next question, but on the need for just massive coordination amongst the various parts of the state government that exist, that goes really beyond the role of the legislature. How do you see the Institute of University of Michigan playing a role in supporting the state's effort on implementation of new laws? And have you mentioned Maryland, have you seen other places where they've gotten it right, or what other accomplishments you point to here that might be instructive?
Yeah, I think that the Institute can help really a lot with the support, bringing the research evidence to implementation, you know, of these laws. Again, I'll, you know, kind of speak more to extremist protection orders. Because that has been where we've been working for quite some time. But we've created an extremist protection order toolkit on our website, which
out there?
I just type in FI and it comes up on my computer. You know, but this URPO toolkit walks through the steps of ERPO, you know, whether you're a healthcare provider, you can go to that, you know, part of the site. If you're a civilian, you can go to that part of the site. But it walks through a part of the site for people who are responding to extreme protection curves. You know, to try to walk them through and, you know, help them figure out what's going on. And that's something fairly little, you know, that we've done. What we can do even more and, you know, would like to do is bring the science to the implementation. You know, take what I'm learning in Maryland to Florida. Take what I've learned in Oregon, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Washington, and you know, really bring those lessons to Michigan. You know, our judges can learn a lot. You know, everybody can learn a lot about this in this training on how to do this. And then for our other laws, like purchase the licensing, the background check, you know, safe storage, the domestic violence misdemeanor firearm restriction, which is another one that I really have spent a lot of time studying. Yeah, we can provide that research support. We can provide evaluation of all of these laws. What I, as a researcher, don't want to see happen for any law anyway, is, you know, for somebody to just pass a law and we've seen it did go. You know, you need to evaluate it. You need to see what's working, what's not working. How can we implement better? Are we implementing it at all? And is there something else we can do? Does the law need a tweak? Does our training need to be tweaked so that we can save more lives? Really want it to work.
And on that note, just we did, I think, I'm pretty sure, it goes back to like last March, so I can't remember everything, but I remember we added language, right? Yeah, I think we added language specifically to ensure that, you know, university researchers are able to work with state officials, with external offers and get the status so that any of it can happen. And so thank you to you for suggesting that. I think that's critical, right? Because you're not necessarily going to get the data unless we'll give it to you, right? And I think that many of us legislature are aware of that and hoping that we can build that into other laws as well. Because you're absolutely right. We should build in our plus or case.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Heinze, I want to get you into the discussion here because your work at better schools really provided the final candidates, I think, to move this forward. But what should school communities be thinking about in relationship to these laws, and will they affect specifically in your handing? And are there resources and programs currently in place that could be utilized to help in your research, obviously?
Sure. Folks, the short answer is I don't know. I really like to believe so. The thing about school violence is gun violence is sort of that tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of different forms of violence happening. So the strategies that we're using to prevent violence are really multifaceted. It's not a panacea. There's not one thing that I can sit here and say, if all of our schools do this, we're going to be in good shape. What I can say is that this sort of legislation is one piece that could have an incredible influence on keeping kids safe at school. So Senator Chang mentioned that about 77% of mass shootings are, someone has indicated their intent. For school-related shootings and mass violence, that's closer to 90%. 90% of school shooters indicated to somebody or in some way that they were intending or planning on committing this violence like this. But here's the rub. If you are a teacher and you notice a duo on your school's page, what do? That is a big deal, and it's a challenge for our teachers. They do not know how to utilize necessarily these laws and sort of the implementation. How they're not dedicated reporters. So who are they going to communicate this information to? We have multiple systems in which to do that. We have Child Protective Services. We have OK to Say. We now have purple laws, all of which I think if you can get one of those in the mix, identify those students who are struggling, identify those students who might be dangerous to themselves or others. That's the first intervention. But then it's not stopping with just the identification. For us, it's trying to find those multifaceted support systems for students. We're looking for teams, threat assessment teams, school-based teams that include not just your school personnel, but also law enforcement, mental health professionals that can help manage a student after a threat or a concern is being raised. So it doesn't just end with, okay, this is a concern, we've identified this concern, but what happens afterwards? We do not want to remove students. And talking about exposure to violence and talking about sort of developmental trajectories, one of the worst things that we can do for students who are struggling, for students who might ultimately perpetrate violence, is remove them from what can be incredible support systems with these schools. So we're trying to think through not just the identification process, not just the, but the management process as well. And we understand that that can take a lot more than even schools have the opportunity to provide support. So making sure that those resources are available to students after the fact, after those concerns have been identified. And I love Dr. Violi's kind of how. I can tell you all the steps for identification, having a conversation with students, and then following up with sort of a management plan. But how on the ground, I can't underscore how difficult that can be for, I don't know if we have any educators in this room, but if you are an educator, your day is already 12 hours long. You are already overflowing with the amount of responsibility that you have to do, and we're creating this additional onus. I think for part of the thing that the Institute has been able to do is provide some of that direct support. So over the past about 8-9 months, we've created an initiative that's first starting with the past schools. What is it that you really need? Where are you finding challenges? So we've got superintendents, we've got teachers, we've got principals, we've got the cafeteria folks, law enforcement, mental health professionals. What are your school safety needs? You might not be surprised. Yes, there are concerns around firearm violence and interpersonal violence, but also mental health concerns. Also trying to communicate with the different resources agencies that interact with schools. We can provide some of that direct support. We can help schools develop a behavioral process. We can help schools create a response plan with first responders or law enforcement. We can do all of these things on the ground so that you're not limited to what is often the case with school safety programming, a training, maybe a day and a half professional development day where we get some of this information and then we leave you to it. We can be that consistent source of support and technical assistance for schools. And another thing that we're really hoping to do, schools, unfortunately, can be sort of these laboratories for ideas. We have ideas for what we believe will keep students safe. We implement these programs, we implement these policies. We really don't know if they're making a difference. We really don't have the data to demonstrate that evidence. We want to be that evaluation support so that schools are implementing different programs and practices. We can help them work with their data. Some of the climate data they may collect, absenteeism data, YRBS data from the CDC. Help them utilize some of this information. It's easy for me to say, coming from the university where I have statisticians all around me, where I have data managers available to me. Not every school has that capacity, and different school challenge or different schools are going to have sort of unique challenges. Let us help you work with your specific environments, your specific communities. Leverage that data so that you can make informed decisions. And we're not putting out programs and practices that we're not really sure are going to be making a difference. I'll give you a great example. The state of Michigan, I love our state, and we require active shooter trainings, but without a lot of guidance around active shooter training. Anybody in this room who's been through an active shooter training? They're scary. They're scary. And I've seen my own daughter come home and talk to me about this experience that she had where somebody locked the door, was coming. I thought she was trying to stay quiet in a hard corner. That's not developmentally appropriate. And yet it can happen because there's minimal guidance for how these things should be enacted, not just in Michigan, but around the country. Again, we can bring that evidence-based science, we can bring those best practices, we can leverage our network of experts from around the country, Association of School Psychologists, Parent-Teacher Association, National Association of School Board, all of these people who are interested in these challenges this school is facing and try to bring them in so that schools can make decent decisions. It's been a wonderful run. We're excited to continue that work, working directly with Michigan schools. I love our national work, but gosh, I'm a Michigander. I want to make sure that we are the safest state in the union. My colleague Mark, I really appreciate this comment or this idea that gun violence is an adult problem. Violence in general, but gun violence in particular is an adult problem. But our students, our young vulnerable population are at the highest burden. They are the ones who suffer the most from gun-related violence. And so how we are supporting those individuals could not be more critical. If we're thinking about new legislation, if we're thinking about safe storage, how are we going to help schools communicate that information to be a resource for parents who now are thinking about, am I a reporter? What should I be doing with my firearms? How can we translate the most cutting edge science? And what roles can schools have in that translation process? Because we know they're going to be affected, unfortunately, and we want them to be in the best position as possible to help keep their student bus.
Thank you for that. Kind of an open question for all of the panelists. We're approaching our time, and I want to ask questions from the audience. But how can we continue to address these issues? Firearm injuries, what are some other approaches that we should be looking to take out your crystal ball, or take this opportunity to talk to the staff of other lawmakers that are here, our lawmakers. Share your thoughts on those things.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Representative Braybeck, who's here. He's the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus.
That's what I always say. It's a much longer name. Unfortunately,
I know that there are definitely things that you could look at past bills that have been introduced, right, to know what things people may still be interested in working on. I would love to, hear from everybody too, if there's an opportunity to have time in. But, ghost guns is something that, it's probably really going to address. I also know that there's definitely an interest in moving forward with gun manufacturer liability. We have not been introduced, but is still on the radar as something to consider. And then I know that there's a number of members of the Prevention Caucus that are actively working on, what can we do around the sort of unfortunate gun buyback situation that we also learned about a couple months ago. And so I know there's a lot of work done on that area as well. But I also think that, in addition to legislation, there's clearly a lot of work that needs to be done to just letting folks know about the laws, how to file an RFO, what do they sort of need, how to, and then also, I know this is like some folks actually will give away gun locks and the gun locks, and so figuring out what we can do to just make sure people have all the information they need is so critical. So I know, as lawmakers, a lot of town halls and things like that. So hoping that we can do that, but also for folks who are in the community and, have places of worship, have a venue to do provide information, or schools, making sure that both teachers, but also parents are aware of some of these things. I think it's really, really critical. Because again, focus the law, we actually make sure that it's done well. So,
Yeah, very cool.
Everybody knows my wish. Not everybody. People who talk to me know my wish list. The research is pretty clear that firearm restriction laws, like domestic violence, firearm restriction, domestic personal protection order, firearm restriction laws, should be paired with relinquishment to affect saving lives. Often what happens if somebody is restricted from having a firearm under a personal protection order is not much at all. Nobody goes to make sure that they don't have a gun anymore. They're not ordered to relinquish it anywhere. They just kind of by default keep the gun, and that doesn't make some people say that that person at that moment is now in the legal term. And that's not safe. So that's my wish list based on the research evidence.
And I need your help. And the reason why is Dr. Zioli's work is going to tell you via state firearm death data, medical examiner data, EMS data, live save. You're going to get that information. About 3% of the students in the state of Michigan tell us they brought a firearm to school. Where's that data? I can't get that data regularly. But to know that if our safe storage laws are having an increase, 3% of about 1.5 million students, how many firearms is that in the school? About 45,000, right? That's 45,000 too many. We need to be sure that we are moving some of these numbers to these precursors to violence that can happen, that augments, exacerbate a violent situation, right? Because a lot of the interpersonal violence begins at school, even if it doesn't manifest at school, it can happen to and from school, it can be carried over into neighborhoods. So some of these indicators, and the schools, for a lot of good reasons, are very protective of their data. We're talking about young people's data. For all those reasons, we respect that, but then trying to understand some of these other indicators beyond some of the ones that we assume are going to be, there's some of the needles that are going to be moved. But to have access and to facilitate some of those examinations, those questions can go a long way, I think, again, making our schools and people safe. There should be a natural result from this sort of legislation.
Do any of you have any questions or perhaps to bring back to but you're welcome to. Please do.
Thank you. It's so great to see all of you here, and thank you all for sharing with us. So a couple of dates. One, I'm really happy to announce that the issues that we found out about from the New York Times article that Senator Chang was referencing, we have moved towards solutions. So MSP released a statement yesterday that they are going to be contracting with an organization in Jackson to completely destroy all confiscated firearms, whether they're confiscated through, their police work or from gun buyback programs. And so we are working on that. We have been working with Senator Pinky. We have some bills that we're hoping to be able to drop for spring break. So that we are kind of, I can't believe it's been only 5 months, and we should have a full, like both, a practical solution and a legislative solution. It's very exciting in our world. In terms of letting kids know about, getting information out in schools, there are a couple of bills on the House side around having safe storage information go out to students, so that's in the works. And one more, it'll come back to me while I'm listening. Thank you.
So either at a state level here, Michigan, across the country, is there any data that can compare kids 10 to 16, 10 to 18 that have had Eddie the Eagle program or hunter safety program versus those that did not, cumulatively with who's committed either accident or suicide or school shooting? And if so, we all know what the answer is going to be. Why aren't we mandating Eddie Eagle programs or hunter safety programs in our public schools when one of the programs is already a state program?
So,
Eddie Eagle has not been found effective in the research in preventing kids from, picking up guns that are in rooms with them. So I don't know that we know the answer, but I have not seen any studies that looked at whether a child had mental safety training, whether they went on to commit homicide or anything like that.
one of the things that we've been actively trying to pursue, understanding from hunting organizations, from firearm owners, to understand some of the practices that we do see implemented typically in hunter safety programs, even if we're sort of trainings. I agree with Dr. Zillow, there has not just been a lot of evaluation, so oftentimes it's done, say, ad hoc, but they're not necessarily with a well-formulated program that we can monitor to see whether or not there's some change in behavior. So, Eagle being one of the very, very few.
But I mean, you could take anybody who was at accident or discharge, committed suicide, or shot at people, and get the list from the DNR and cross them, right? And then you would know statistically those that have and those that don't.
Dan, do you mind if I follow?
Yeah,
on that? But, one of the things that, after back in government relations that you and from a data perspective, Justin, you kind of touched on it a little bit, about how challenging it is. And Senator Chang is super generous in providing, some framework for the team to evaluate, but getting those types of data, what are we talking as far as a time frame here? It's almost sometimes shocking to me how long it takes. So if we were to go to the DNR today and point tomorrow and say, what,
Don't know that I'm allowed to have that. Yeah. There's a lot of data around, federal, we're just not allowed to have this research. And I don't know that I'm allowed to have it.
Yeah, my question is, how do you see the prosecution of parents of youth that commit gun crimes being prevented in this way? Well,
So safe storage prosecution, is that what you're asking about?
well, I mean, it could be anything, right? A child of parents that somehow allow them to commit crimes with guns.
My interest in those types of laws is in their preventative effect.
Is what?
Is in their preventative effect, is in, safe storage. Safe storage, the way we think that law works is through a culture change. So people learn about the fact that they're supposed to store the gun safely. Maybe they don't want to, at first, for various reasons, but they store the gun safely, because it's the law, and then it just becomes the culture of the people storing guns safely. I'm interested in that part. I hope nobody ever is in the position where their kids accessed a gun and used it, and it's facing prosecution. That is just so sad. But prevention wise, yeah, I'm really interested in those laws.
Hi, I'm Chandra Marshall. I work for NPHI, in the center where we teach it, the gun violence prevention, community violence prevention, strategy. Question about safe storage as well. Can you explain to me, just briefly, I know we're almost out of time, just what that actually looks like in practicality, so that's locked, or is it on me?
If you're in your home or in your car, so, yeah, if you're in your home and you have kids, or you know that there are going to be kids, as long as it's locked in some way, we don't specify, so, yeah. So, could be an unsafe, could be a trigger lock, could be, I had conversations with the guy who owns the company rack, right, so the rack, like that's allowable too, with the mountable thing. So any of those, as long as it's not safely stored and the child cannot access. And then also if you're in your car and and the kid is in your car or you're going somewhere, then it needs to be locked. And I can't remember if we set out of, I feel like we did, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's a lot of conversation about ensuring that if you're in a car, and that it's gotta be stored safely there as well. But as far as like the type of device, as long as it's safely stored in the car.
Well, guys, we've exhausted our time today. Becca or Sean, anyone?
That's not this like. Thank you again, and get a round of applause for our panel. Thank you all again, and thank you all for coming today and online. We will have this recording up on our YouTube channel shortly, but appreciate you coming. Please grab some more food on the way out, and if you didn't sign in on the way in, if we could get you to sign in on the way out, it's a table out there. Again, thank you all for coming.
Water. I